We were talking about the situation in West Asia. We had cut off at a point when there is a great deal of fear that what is happening, the questions that are being asked. You're saying they're very foolish. Who is providing the wherewithal? Where have the armored personnel carriers come from? Where are the tanks coming from? Where are the guns coming from? Where are the armament? Where's the ordnance coming from?
Right.
Where has the training been done? Who is implicated directly? You know, how long are we going to touch all of this with kid gloves? It is next door to our house.
Absolutely. No, I think these two elements, I think you've put your finger on the problem, because a group like the ISIS doesn't spring out of nowhere. Right? The regional and military and financial context is very clear. Without the conflict in Syria that was fully backed by the United States, Saudis, Qataris and others, and without ongoing direct support for the ISIS from one or the other important regional player, there is no way that this group would have emerged and posed the kind of threat that it's posing.
Right.
The second factor, though, and this is something which no less a person than Ayatollah Sistani himself concedes, when they speak of Baghdad also, the importance of the Baghdad authorities reaching out, having a more widespread, diverse government. Clearly, the ISIS is tapping into a public resentment, particularly in Sunni areas, of the manner in which Nurul Maliki has run the government. This is something that the United States, Iran, all of those who are worried now, they ought to have picked up on this sort of problem and pushed, even Ayatollah Sistani for that matter, should have insisted on a course correction, not today. In fact, I'm just wondering whether in the middle of a conflict, changing horses, in the manner in which the United States is suggesting Iraq do, whether that's militarily a very wise thing to do. You have to then install a new prime minister. You have to see that the armed forces are loyal to that person.
Right.
You know, this is a big question.
You see, what we must remember is the day on the 9th of April 2003 when the Americans declared that they had won. And why had they won? They had won because Saddam Hussein's statue had been pulled down in Firdaus Square. By whom? The huge hullabaloo was that somehow there's a popular resentment and therefore it was pulled down by American Marines. No one had the strength to pull that statue down. Then Dick Cheney appeared on a program and he asked for crowds to come out. The only people who were willing to come out at the fall of Saddam Hussein were the Shias from Sadr city. And therefore, that is when you had people coming out and beating Saddam's picture with whatever they had in their hands. This, in other words, the defeat of Saddam and the Baathists was the first status reversal for the Sunnis as well in all of Iraq. You follow? So it is known. Now, someone like Ayatollah Sistani was talking about a composite culture, talking about we have always lived together, talking about, but the politics as it has evolved has either forced Maliki or Maliki has not been able to handle it. Now there's a lot of resentment, and this resentment is clambering on to the bandwagon which is being ridden by ISIS. So ISIS is not by itself. ISIS, a whole wide coalition has jumped onto it.
Including Baath, including ex-Baathists.
Including the Baath party. Yes.
No, that's a fair assessment of the situation. Even your earlier point that any conflict suits the military industrial complex wherever it works. So yes, I mean that also suits them, but my only problem was that whether they would like to get deep into itself at their own cost. But the conflict in the region, I don't know if they have a blueprint for how it should be resolved or how what the outcome would be. They did not know of the outcome in Iraq in a way. They had no prediction about what will happen in Syria. They had no idea about what is going to happen in Afghanistan. I mean, I shiver at the thought that Afghanistan may follow the Iraqi model. But that is where the problem lies of several question marks hanging without any sensible direction anywhere.
Siddharth?
Well, I think the manner in which
the marionette, the puppeteer has lost control. The strings are working or not working.
No, I think the strings are clearly not working. I think that the ISIS has been put into play by a diverse coalition with in many ways contradictory or conflicting interests, and those interests are short-term interests which are going to create problems in the long term. The links between ISIS and Al Qaeda, the sectarian nature of its politics and its entire approach is clearly a recipe for disaster for the region. And I think that sooner this military challenge is confronted, but confronted in a way that upholds the pluralistic nature of Iraqi society, I think the better it will be for Iraq and for the wider region. The one lesson to be learned, which is of some relevance for us in India, is one conclusion to be drawn is that after spending enormous amounts of money and training and so on, the incapacity of the Iraqi army to deal with this kind of challenge obviously holds lessons for what's going to unfold in Afghanistan. The Afghan national security forces on paper are impressive. They have manpower, material, they lack air support. But to what extent would they be able to face a challenge from Taliban and from the remnants of Al-Qaeda?
I have a strange feeling, Professor Muni, if we somehow discard this magnifying glass, which sort of differentiates between Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and Taliban. I have a feeling that there's a common, I think it's only to confuse people. I think our viewers would be terribly confused by these very arcane definitions and divisions. They're all Al-Qaeda-like elements. They've spawned over the American watch in Iraq, in Syria, what they did in Libya. I mean, in Libya, their own embassy unfortunately got burned. Their ambassador, Stevens, he died, he was killed. All the armaments then went across the border into Mali. Mali, the northern part of Mali, was taken. So therefore, it's not someone must call the guilt of those who have created this huge chaos.
Well, I'm still keeping my fingers crossed. Why I do so? Because derive some lessons from Afghanistan, where you have all these different groups, supposedly springing up from the same sources in one way or the other. Of course, united on any foreign intervention, any American domination, any kind of that exercise. And still, when it comes to small bits of pieces, everybody is looking for one's own turf in one way or the other, and not uniting. Man, I have not seen the Islamic world uniting for one cause. I mean, the whole.
It was always a myth.
Yeah,
there never was a united Islamic world.
Therefore, these are the people. I mean, how can we? Conceptually it exists, the idea exists, but when you translate a concept into ground realities, somehow I hesitate to go along this, that there is some force which is driving them all together towards one single direction.
Yes, you spoke about calling to account those who were responsible. Around the time the ISIS crisis burst onto the front pages, there was an extraordinary op-ed article by Tony Blair. You may have read it. You may have read the response by Boris Johnson, the mayor of London, who as an MP had voted for the war. And he, in cold print, said Tony Blair needs professional psychiatric help. Because Tony Blair, even to this day, was justifying the 2003 invasion of Iraq and saying, please don't blame us, in other words, those who wanted that invasion, for the current crisis. So you have Western leaders who continue to delude themselves. And worse, that policy of invading a sovereign country, dismantling its state apparatus without having any plan B is still, in a sense, being pursued officially vis-a-vis Syria. You've done it twice in Iraq and Libya. You destroyed the state, and into that vacuum rushed all kinds of groups who have democracy the furthest from their minds. So I think that the respecting sovereignty, respecting existing state structures, and working with the international community to bring about a transition, an orderly transition towards a democratic system, accountability. That's really the way that we have to go, rather than outside intervention of the kind that people in the US are talking about.
What can India do? Can India do anything? Should India try anything? What would you recommend?
Well, I see our utter helplessness in terms of the crisis we are facing there, that we do not have much access to what the situation is. In fact, India could emerge as, and particularly today, with reasonably amicable access to Saudi Arabia, to Iran. We are not a hostile country there. Our image is by and large acceptable. If at all we could use a very constructive diplomacy to see the regional forces come together on a platform, rather than being used by the strings attached here and there. Whether we can do it, we should do it.
We actually, Muni, we have lost, there is evidence that we have lost interest in the area. Did we not? After 1990, we lost interest. Siddharth,
well,
would you re-engage?
You know, just as evidence of us having lost interest, the President's speech, the Rashtrapati's speech to Parliament, which spoke about foreign policy, whether by oversight or design, had no reference to West Asia, which I thought was quite glaring as an omission, right? Considering the large amounts of Indians who work there and India's economic links. The question you asked is, what could India do? My sense is that there are two crises that we confront, right? One, which is the one we are seeing reported here actively, of the plight of Indians who are stranded. Yeah. And there, I'm afraid, options are really quite limited. Iraq is far away. You lack the means to act in your individual capacity for their welfare. So you have to work through the Iraqi government or the good offices of countries that perhaps are on good terms with the ISIS. As a diplomatic strategy, my suggestion would be for India, again, not to try to act alone, but to act with our partners in the RIC, Russia, India, China, trilateral, or perhaps BRICS. But I think the India, Russia, China trilateral. Russia and China are countries which have important geopolitical interests in the region. They have important economic interests. And we share a common approach, which is that the three countries together reject the kind of regime change, the kind of interventionism that the US and the UK, the Anglo-American or the Western world has advocated. Yeah. So I think this commonality of approach may yield some results if wielded as a kind of diplomatic initiative, but where India works with its partners.
Right. India will have to, on that note, I think we have run out of time, Professor Muni. So we will, on that note, well, it remains inconclusive, this discussion. We have not even touched on the Shia-Sunni divide, which is being played out in Western media at great length. Because I believe that the Shia-Sunni is actually a disguised way of looking at the Saudi-Iranian conflict, which is at the heart of affairs ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. People forget that 1979 was not just the Islamic Revolution. 1979, immediately after the Islamic Revolution, there was a virtual coup within Saudi Arabia when the great mosque, the Grand Mosque in Mecca, had been taken over by Saudi extremists. Saudis have not been able to work out, except by throwing a blanket on that story, how to work out a navigational strategy between their own extremism and what is being sold as Shia expansion outside. Well, it's a long subject, and we shall take it up on another occasion. Meanwhile, thank you very much, and goodbye.